I want to turn to Genesis 45. I was just talking to Jesse. We are coming to the end of the beginning, as he put it. We're getting to the end of our quarter, our study of Genesis, the book of beginnings. So, coming to the end of the book of beginnings, we're covering the second half of chapter 45 today, and we'll also cover chapters 46 and 47. On Wednesday, Bill and Jesse are going to cover 48 and 49. And then next Sunday, we'll cover the last chapter, chapter 50, and kind of do a review of the book. And then we'll be on to Exodus from there. So, let's have a word of prayer. Our almighty and our great and powerful Father, we are so thankful for your goodness to us, for your mercy to us. We're so thankful for these people, our family who meets here at Hammond, to come together to worship you today in unity of spirit, and at this time to study your word. And we pray this will be with us as we study, that you will give us wisdom to understand and to know you better and to serve you better. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Amen. Okay, so as we've gone through Genesis, we've tried to focus on the nature of God, understanding God, who He is, and understanding man, and therefore how we relate to God, how we relate to one another. At the end of the book here, talking about Joseph, a strong emphasis on how we relate to each other. Talking about God, His faithfulness to His promises, and understanding how original readers, the Israelites, would have understood this message, and how it's our story. I want to start by reviewing a little bit from the last section. We gave Bill and Jesse kind of an impossible task with three and a half chapters on Wednesday. So I want to just go back and think about that a little bit, and think about his brothers, and that'll kind of help set us up for today as well. All right, so think about Joseph's brothers. Before the time when Joseph goes to Egypt, or he's sold to Egypt, and then where they picked up last time with Potiphar and everything, what do we already know about Reuben prior to up to the point where Joseph is in Egypt? Yes?
His father's concubine.
Yes, okay. He slept with his with Bilhah, his father's concubine, all right? Large problem. What else? Yeah.
He did stick up for Joseph and
sort
of save him from death, because that's what his brothers wanted to do.
Yeah, initially he had the idea to put him into the pit, to not kill him, and then he was hoping to be able to come back and take him back, okay? All right? How about Judah? What do we know about Judah? Right at that point, yes.
He said he wanted to sell Joseph.
Okay. He was the one who had the idea to sell him. There's no point in killing him because we can make money off of him and then get a double benefit out of the deal. Okay? What else do we know about Judah? Yeah.
He also has slept with his daughter-in-law.
Yeah. Okay, so there's the whole episode in chapter 38, right? Where he's basically he's a Canaanite. Or he's behaving like a Canaanite, right? He marries a Canaanite, he has Canaanite friends, he goes to a prostitute, which unbeknownst to him is actually his daughter-in-law, and his sons were completely evil. God just kills them because they're evil. All right, so he's just a complete mess, a Canaanite in that story. But what happens at the very end of the story with Judah and Tamar? Karen.
Is that where he kills all the people, the men?
Okay. That was Simeon and Levi.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. That's important too. So I'm glad you mentioned that, but that was Simeon and Levi. Amanda?
He actually acknowledged that he had been more in the wrong than Tamar.
Yeah. So at the end of that story in chapter 38, when he gets found out, when Tamar kind of does big reveal, and he gets caught, at that point he says that Tamar was more righteous than he is, and notice it says that he did not go into her again. Okay, so it feels like maybe that was kind of like a rock bottom, that into a turning point from there. Okay, so then we come to chapter 42, which we talked about on Wednesday. So remember the story in chapter 42 where the Joseph is in Egypt, recognizes his brothers, they don't recognize him. He sends them back and says, don't come back here again unless you bring Benjamin with you. All right? So they go back to their father, to Jacob. Who is the first to try to convince Jacob to let Benjamin go to Egypt? Reuben. Okay, Reuben tries. Reuben tries talking to Jacob and say, we need to, we need to go back. They're out of food again. We need to go back, but we have to take Benjamin. Does it work?
No.
Okay, yeah.
So he offers him his two sons, which we know that, that's inconsequential to him.
Yeah.
Because, it's not the same. He's already lost Joseph, so he doesn't want to lose his other son by Rachel.
Yeah, it's really interesting with Reuben because it's like he tries, but he just doesn't. It's similar to Joseph, right? He kind of tried, but then he wasn't actually able to save Joseph. It's like the same thing. It's like he gives this try, but his argument isn't effective because number one, it doesn't really make sense, right? Like, why would Jacob be any happier that two of his grandsons died? Like, okay, if Benjamin's dead, then I'll kill my two sons, like two of your grandsons. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And it's also kind of like, I don't know, it sort of reminds me a lot with his two daughters, right? Like, how does that help the situation at all? It's similar to that, okay? All right, so that's Reuben. So then you come to chapter 43, who else tries to convince Jacob to let Benjamin go? Jesse.
Judah, once all the food's gone.
Yes. Okay, so Judah tries again, and is his argument effective? Yes. Why? What was different about it between him and Reuben? Go.
That was his daddy. Ain't no need for us to go. We don't have Benjamin.
Okay, yeah. So I think there's two things. One is that some time has gone by, and it's more of a desperate situation right now. Okay? But I also think there's something about Judah's argument itself that's more effective. Yeah.
He said, basically that he would, blame, that his father could blame him for the rest of his life, that he would take the blame, and he would also offer protection for Benjamin as well.
Right. So he offers himself as personally responsible for bringing Benjamin back. Okay? Go ahead.
Well, Simeon is still in Egypt.
Yes.
I had kind of forgotten that there's a brother who it doesn't appear his dad is concerned about at all, of going back for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No concern for getting him, and just let him stay there.
Yeah. Yeah, and remember there's also an age thing here, right? Reuben is the oldest, so he kind of gets the first stab at it and fails. Simeon's not around because he's there. Levi, maybe, and also Simeon because of and Levi, what we mentioned before, don't seem like they're doing very well, and so it's kind of falling to Judah. But Judah offers himself. He's personally responsible. It's not like, oh, if we don't bring your son back, I'll kill somebody else. He personally is saying, I'll be responsible for this. Put it in my hands, right? Okay? So I think we see a difference in maturity, even in the argument itself, okay? All right, so then we come to chapter 44, and now remember in the story, Joseph sets up another test of the brothers, where he sends them away, but puts his cup, his personal cup, in the sack of Benjamin, and then sets it up and saying, well, he's going to hold Benjamin, Joseph saying he's going to hold Benjamin responsible to be killed because he stole the cup, okay? After that, who speaks up for Benjamin? Judah. Okay, Judah again, all right, chapter 44. All right, and so we have this long section, the whole second half of chapter 44 is Judah's talking to Joseph, directly to Joseph to plead for Benjamin. All right, so what do we see when you look at that speech? This is verse 18 all the way through the end of the chapter in 44, what do you see in Judah's character that he revealed by that speech, what he says to Joseph?
Well, he cares about his father now.
Okay, yes, he cares about his father, which he did not. All right, so as he goes through and tells the story, he ends saying, if we don't come back with this son, our father's going to die. Right? And so he shows this genuine concern for his father, which is different than before, because before, when they tricked their father, that didn't seem to care at all, right?
Do you suppose that Joseph heard Judah say, let's sell him? Because Judah was the one that initially had that idea.
Yeah.
I don't know whether he was near the pit or whatever.
Could be. Yeah, it's hard to say.
Maybe Joseph might have known this is the brother that tried to sell me, and now he's...
Could be. Yeah, could be. What else? What else do you see in the speech? Jesse.
He seems to have moved past his problem with his favoritism, because he talks about how he favored Benjamin, and his life is tied up in him. Kind of moved past that a little bit and matured.
Yeah, I mean, he shows actual genuine concern for his brother, who is really in the same position that Joseph was before, right? It's the son of Rachel, sort of the favored son now, right? And this could be, if he had the same attitude as before, here's his opportunity to get rid of it, right? But instead, he's speaking up and again offering himself. The whole big conclusion of that is, I'll take his place. Keep me, do with me what you want, but let him go back to his father. Okay? And I think there's other things in the speech, the respectfulness with which he speaks to Joseph. Just when you look through that, this is a completely different person than the one that we saw with Tamar and with Joseph earlier in his life.
I just think that it's a big turning point for not only him, but his brothers start to realize too, the importance of things that are coming.
Mm-hmm.
Just, they're starting to realize all the bad things that they did, and we're like, oh,
yes.
this is
yes.
cool.
And we saw that, right, at the end of chapter 33, where they all kind of immediately are like, oh, all these things are bad things are happening to us. And remember, it points out that they remembered that they said Joseph's cry for please. Can you imagine 20 years of that ringing in your head, your younger brother pleading and crying, please, right? Yeah.
The big reveal, as far as he's admitting to Joseph himself that his father thinks that he's been ripped apart, and they don't realize he's Joseph still, so he's telling them, our other brother is apparently dead, we've never seen him again, and if I don't bring Benjamin back, then he's got neither child from Rachel, his wife.
Right, exactly, right. And there's a point in, here, I'll get to this. So, all right, so the point I'm trying to make here is that Judah is a changed man, okay? Over his life, over the years, and somewhat similar to his dad, and we saw his dad change over his life, similar with Judah. Judah has gone from just, the pit, morally, to this person, all right? So he's gone from hatred and jealousy to becoming his brother's keeper, right? He's literally, at this point, taking responsibility to be his brother's keeper, okay? Yeah.
We see a lot of symbolism. Judah's offering himself for Benjamin. Christ offered himself for
Yes. Okay. Yes. Good. All right. Which goes along the same thing we're saying with Joseph. Yeah.
God asked Adam, where are you? Joseph is searching them out. He's searching them out.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
He's really finding out where they're at.
Absolutely. And you see that in his reaction, right? It's after this that when Judah does all this and he sees that Judah is changed, that's when you get his reaction in chapter 45. Joseph could not control himself anymore, right? Okay. In other words, at that point he's like, okay, I can't. I've seen what I need.
Right.
Okay. So again, from causing his father's grief. Notice there's the same phrase in chapter 37, verse 35, where Jacob says that he would go down to Sheol mourning for Joseph. Notice that's what in chapter 44. Then that's what Judah says to Joseph. If we go back without Benjamin, we're going to send our father down to Sheol in grief. Okay, same kind of phrase there. Okay, And essentially, Judah is stepping up to assume personal responsibility for his family's well-being at this point. Okay? So he's fourth in line of the sons, but we see at this point he's the one who's stepping up. And we'll see that more. The reason, so I have two reasons I think this is important. Number one is, again, we see this arc of a person can change in their life.
Right.
Even people who are just, you know, the worst can change and be changed. And we see that with Jacob, we see that with Judah. The second reason is this whole thing becomes really important on Wednesday when we get to chapter 49, 48 and 49. Well, 49, okay? Because Jacob is going to go through and bless his sons. And if you don't know this story, you're going to wonder why different ones are going to get their blessing. And it's because of all these things that we're talking about, okay? So I'll just leave that there, and we'll talk more about that on Wednesday. All right, so we come to chapter 45. Joseph, as we said, reveals himself, talks, his brothers are able to talk, and he tells them who he is, and he tells them his plans for them to take care of them. And we come then to verse 16, and we see at that point, then, the news spreads in Pharaoh's house that Joseph's brothers have come, and it pleased Pharaoh. Pharaoh's happy about that, and so he talks to Joseph, and he tells him what he should do. He said, say to your brothers, load your beasts, go back to the land of Canaan, and take your father and all your household, and come here. Come to us, and we'll give you the best of the land. All right, so he's very pleased, and he says, we'll give you the best of the land, you shall eat the fat of the land. And he tells Joseph to tell them to take wagons so that they'll be able to bring their family with them, and their wives and their children, and bring everything and come. And he says, don't have any concern for what your goods, because the best of Egypt is going to be yours. So that's what they do. They take wagons. They go on the journey. He gives them specific gifts with the change of clothes. But he again gives more to Benjamin, more clothes, specific, more money to Benjamin, and then he sends donkeys loaded with all kinds of good things back to Jacob, and gives him an instruction. He tells his brothers, don't quarrel while you're on the trip. And so they do. So they go out of Egypt, they go back to their father, and they tell Jacob, they say, Joseph is still alive, and he's the ruler over the whole land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart, it says, his heart became numb because he didn't believe him. But they tell him, they show him all the gifts, they tell him all the story, and finally he believes them. He says, it is enough, Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. Okay, so we have these details of Pharaoh's generosity to the family, all right? So why is Pharaoh being so generous to the family? Yeah.
Well, Joseph has proved himself to be worthy of this praise of Pharaoh, and I believe Pharaoh's heart is pure at this time to say, yeah, bring your family, and we're going to take care of them. You know, obviously it's not going to work out that way, you know, we're going to get blood dry. But right now, I believe his heart is in the right place.
Yeah, I mean, Pharaoh, in a sense, owes everything to Joseph, right? I mean, Joseph's the one who interpreted the dreams and came up with the whole plan to save it. All that's happened, right? They had the 7 years of famine, they saved up, and at this point, they're selling to, all the lands around, right? Pharaoh is becoming the richest, most powerful person in the world. Right? Because all the world is coming around to him to buy grain.
And that's the other thought that came to mind is, not only did they save enough grain and everything for the Egyptians, they saved even more so they could feed all these other people as well.
Exactly.
So he had great wealth at that point.
Exactly, right? And he's saying, great, Joseph, bring here, come. He's extremely happy with Joseph, right? I love Joseph's instruction, don't quarrel on the way. I mean, again, you can imagine maybe he still has, a little bit of that, the teenager who was checking up on him before, right? But also, you can imagine what's going through the brother's mind at this point, right? Like, you can see they could start on the way, as soon as they get out of Joseph's and start on their way home, like, oh, this is your fault. And Reuben, I told you not to kill him, right? You can imagine, and Joseph's trying to tell him, look, don't, and this will go back to what he'll say later about all of this happening because of God's thing, right? Don't blame yourselves. All of this is happening for God's, because of God's control. All right. There's really awesome details, and I mentioned this toward these last few chapters of the story of Joseph. There's awesome details as to how people respond, how people react, how they feel about things. When Jacob is told that Joseph is still alive, his heart became numb, right? And so it gives you this text, this text that we can imagine that feeling after 20 years of thinking your son was dead, and we would say his heart stopped, right? And because he couldn't believe it. And there's a lot of that, which I think is really cool. Like, earlier in the book, it just kind of tells the story. It doesn't tell you how people are feeling about it, right? When Abraham is on the journey to sacrifice his son Isaac, you can imagine what must be going through his head, but it doesn't say. But here in these details, it gives a lot of those details with Jacob and with Joseph. Okay. Other thoughts on chapter 45 there? Yeah.
So he's thinking that his son has been dead for 20 years.
Right.
And so yeah, I can see the numbness of it to believe, he had a hard time coming to believe that he's still alive, but I didn't really get out of the story whether the other sons told the whole truth other than he was alive. So does he know at this point that they sold him?
Yeah. I mean, you would have to think, right? Because their story, the reason he thinks they're dead is because that's what they told him, right? So at some point, there had to be the conversation, wait a minute, you told me he was dead, right? Now, they kind of tricked him. They just, by just giving him the coat, they didn't say they saw him get eaten by the animals. So Jacob just made the presumption. So I don't know. That's a good. It definitely raises the question. Yeah.
That would have been a conversation for sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of a lie, because they presented the code and said, judge for yourself.
Right.
Whatever.
Exactly.
You know,
Right. So they let him.
And they let him make the conclusion.
Right. So he concludes, he says, I will go and see him before I die. Right? So, on the way as we come to chapter 46, so it does exactly, he journeys with all that he had. First he comes to Beersheba. We've seen Beersheba before. And when he's there, he offers sacrifices to God. And God appears to him. God appears to him in a vision, okay? And he's going to talk to him. What does God tell him? Go, okay? Yes, all right? And specifically, he says, don't be afraid to go down to Egypt. Why would God need to tell him that?
Didn't he tell him one time, don't move? Or not yet, maybe. Abraham
Yeah, okay.
It says that, I will make you a great nation, and myself will go out of Egypt, and I will bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes.
Yeah, so I'm not sure about specifically saying don't go to Egypt, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, he says, I will go with you.
Yes, right. Jesse?
Well, in 15, it talks about how they would be captives. They would be kept slaves there.
Oh,
so
that's
he
true.
might have been aware
Oh,
of
that's a
that
good point.
and not quite understood it, but
Yeah,
you know.
that's a good point. Yeah, sorry, Gene, were you going to say something?
Well, I said that God had told them that the land that he was gonna give them was up there.
Yeah,
Canaan.
right.
That's where they were supposed to stay. and
Right.
they were staying up there.
So there has been throughout Jacob's life this whole idea about where he is, right? Because when he leaves to go to Haran, there's this whole question that he really shouldn't be doing that, right? But then God says, yes, it's okay, you can go, I'm going to bring you back. So it's kind of the same thing here. He's like, okay, it's okay to go to Egypt. I'm going to be with you, because the problem is he's leaving the land of promise, right? But God says, I'm going to go with you. It's okay, and I'm going to bring you up again, okay? Which is interesting, because when does that happen? Yeah, after he's dead, and a long time after he's dead, but but God still does bring him back. And then there's this great line, Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. Right? Again, these details. Again, imagine what God is saying there. Again, after 20 years of thinking your son is dead, saying, when you die, it's going to be Joseph's hand who's going to be right there with you to close your eyes. All right? So the rest of the chapter then is this description of Jacob's family who goes to Egypt. So it talks about his son, his offspring, his Jacob's grandson. So the sons, obviously not including Joseph, but it does actually talk about them. So all the sons of Joseph and then their children, and it gives a list. And the point is, these are the ones who are going to go to Egypt. All right, he goes with all that he has. It describes all his offspring. Just a few kind of notes that I picked out. In verse 10, I think, did you guys see what was interesting to you guys when you just read through kind of this list? Anything stand out to you?
Well, in verse 22, these are the sons of Rachel who were born to Jacob. There were 14 first of all. I'm guessing that's sons and grandsons?
Yes. I think, and it's interesting, it's similar up in verse 18 with Zilpah. So it's more like offspring, right? It's listing the sons and the grandsons, yeah. Yes, okay. So I think in verse 10, it's interesting. The only mentions one of their wives that Simeon also married a Canaanite. All right, so like Judah, we didn't know that before, but it just drops that in there. And I think it's so interesting with Simeon. Like, there's no mention of anything positive or redemption with Simeon. Okay, and again, that'll be important when you get to chapter 49. These things, and those things will follow past Genesis. All right, you'll see that all the time when the tribes go into the land. You'll see Simeon just kind of like disappears.
I found it interesting that when they named Judah's sons, well, first of all, the first two died, they mentioned that, but also they said the sons of Perez. So they were talking about the Perez son. They don't mention the other son that Judah had, because they were twins. Perez, yes, from his daughter-in-law, she had twins, but only Perez is mentioned with children.
That's true. That's a good point. Interesting. Yeah, so I don't know.
It's almost like they made a point of it.
Yeah, that's true. That's interesting. Yeah. So chapter 12, or verse 12 is kind of like a little review of what happened in chapter 38, right? Okay, with the sons of Judah. Verse 11, we're introduced to the sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Those become important when you get later on into the law. Verse 12, 38. Okay, so 70 total people go to Egypt. All right, verse 28. Who leads the family to Egypt? Judah. All right, you see this again? This kind of Judah is becoming the leader of the family. And essentially what's happened, Judah is becoming the head of the household, right? Jacob is still alive, but he's old and so on. So the torch is being passed. It's not being passed to Reuben, Simeon, or Levi. It's being passed. Judah is the one who's assuming the head of the household. Again, important when you get to chapter 49. All right, so that's not all of chapter 46, but anything else on that section through verse 27?
Well, I'm thinking, as we watch Judah becoming the head, Judah messed up too. Just like Simeon and Levi and Reuben, like they all sinned.
Yep.
And yet, so the difference isn't that someone becomes the head because they don't sin.
Right.
That's not what happens.
Right.
God sees his repentance, his change, so which gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, absolutely. It's because they changed. But it's also not because they sinned and then stayed the same. It's because he changed. Where again, there's kind of this emphasis that it doesn't seem like Simeon ever did, right? So the change, but the ability to change then allows that blessing. Okay, yeah.
Well, he also followed through. He was true to his word. I'm
Yes.
carrying Benjamin with me, and the kid's gonna. So he proved himself to be worthy of some honor.
Yeah. So then the rest of the next of the chapter then is Jacob and Joseph actually reunited. So Judah goes ahead, but Joseph at that point knows they're coming, so he takes his chariot to go out to meet his father, to meet Jacob. He presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. So again, you see this picture, right? 20 years of emotion kind of poured out in one reuniting moment. Yeah.
I was having another thought that it was Reuben that said, I'll sacrifice my 2 sons if I don't bring Benjamin back. So he was kind of a loose cannon if you think of it that way.
Yes.
I don't want that. Let me kill my sons if I'm, if somebody
Right.
didn't follow through. So maybe that was the thing.
Right.
I just thought of it.
Yeah. Yeah, so then we see Jacob's, Israel's reaction. Now let me die, since I've seen your face and know that you are alive. Now Israel can die in peace, right? Because he's seen his son again. Okay, so Joseph at that point gives him clear instructions on what to say to Pharaoh. All right, so he coaches them a little bit about what they want to say to Pharaoh, and specifically to tell them that it's the truth, but to tell them that they are shepherds, that they've always been shepherds, that's their profession. Why would he do that? Karen?
Well, it says that the sheep were an abomination to them.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
they just called them livestock.
Right. So he knows what Pharaoh's reaction is going to be to that. Yes.
Well, and that's gonna be good for the Israelites because God doesn't want them intermarrying with
Yes.
the Egyptians.
Right.
So if they're abominable and they put them in a land away, then they're isolated and they're gonna intermarry
Right.
with each other and they're not gonna marry the Egyptians.
Right. So the last verse of the chapter there, he's setting them up so that they'll go be in the land of Goshen, which is good for their feet. It's apparently a good, watered land for their feet, but also a way they kind of in their own place there, not mixing in with the rest of the people of Egypt. Okay. So he's kind of setting that up to happen. All right. All right. So yeah. So remember, that's where he wanted them to be back in chapter 45. Right away, when he revealed himself to his brothers, he said he wanted them to be in Goshen. So he's setting that up to happen, and ultimately, this is God taking care of Jacob's family, separated from the Egyptians, giving them food, everything fully provided for them. Taken care of during the famine, obviously. But beyond that, being fruitful and multiplying greatly. So as you go into chapter 47, and that's the way it works out, exactly as they do what he says. Pharaoh asks them their occupation. They tell him they're shepherds. He tells them that they could live in the land. It lets them settle in the best of the land. So it's not just that they're taken care of; they're fruitful and multiplied greatly. I think that's verse 12 as well. Nope, that's not verse 12. Read it for that. I don't know why I have verse 12. Anyway, but ultimately the point is, God is doing it, but notice he's doing it through Joseph. Right? He's using Joseph because Joseph has risen to this position because he was faithful. He was obedient. He's risen to this position, and so God is doing all of this. But he's doing it through Joseph, using Joseph as a tool for his glory to accomplish what he wants to accomplish. Got it? All right. So as we go to the story then where Jacob comes and meets Pharaoh and talks to him, Pharaoh asks him about his life. Asks about how old he is, and what's Jacob's answer? 130. But then he gives some, he goes further and gives some commentary on it, Jesse.
I think it's kind of interesting. He says, few and evil have been my days.
Yeah.
But when you look at the description of Abraham and Isaac, both of them are described as being old and full of years.
Yes. Excellent. Right. So when Abraham died, when Isaac died, it talked about them being old and full of years, and this really beautiful description of their death and their families gathered around them. Jacob, looking back on his life, and he says, "Few and evil have been the years of my life." Now, the few part is kind of interesting because he doesn't actually live a whole lot of few years. So why would he say that? Why would that be his answer? When you look back on his life. Yeah, brother.
Fewer than my ancestors.
Yeah. So it is a fewer, okay, but yeah, go ahead.
I think that in his thinking, he was dead when he lost Joseph all those years, because it says in his spirit revived
Yeah.
in 45 when he learned that his son was, all those years to him were dead.
Yeah. So you kind of have this opportunity, as we've read all of this about Jacob, thinking back on his whole life, right? At this point in his life, Jacob has faith in God, like we've been talking about, but he's lived a pretty tough life, right? All the years with Laban were not fun, right? He had to labor for his wife and was given the wrong wife for 7 years, and he served another, so 14 years for his wife. During that time, Laban's changing his wages and cheating him, and all these bad things are happening to him, and then he stays for a while again before he finally leaves. He comes back dreading this meeting with Esau, thinking, not sure if Esau is going to want to kill him and all these things. And then, as they come back to the land, this whole episode with Joseph and thinking his son is dead, and he spent 20 years, grieving for his son. He's had a really difficult life, even though now, as an older person, he has faith in God and demonstrates his faith and his obedience, but the choices that he made in his life made for a very difficult life. And now he looks back on it and says, few and evil have been the years of my life. This is not what his life could have been with different choices earlier. Yeah.
When he was, going out initially, and he slept on the rock, and then he bargained with God, if you'll do this, if you'll do that, then I'll be, faithful to you. And there's a whole different attitude.
Right.
There.
Yeah.
I'll follow God, but you need to do this and this and this, and then I'll be your servant. And so it was a hard lesson.
Yeah. Good.
Conclusion, God will be with you through time and circumstance.
Yeah, absolutely. God stuck with him, but that doesn't mean that there aren't consequences of our choices, right? And we have to deal with those. All right. So I'm going to skip a little bit then to the end of chapter 47 here, because we're just talking about Jacob here in his life. At the end of chapter 47, Jacob gives instructions concerning his bones. Okay? So he asks Jacob for a favor. He says, please deal kindly, please do me a favor. And he asked Joseph for a favor. What's the favor that he asked from Joseph? Here.
To return him back to Canaan, to his homeland, to be buried with his wife.
Yeah, right. That's right. Do not bury me in Egypt, all right? He's come to Egypt. He's going to die there, but don't bury me in Egypt. Instead, take me back. Let me lie with my fathers, okay?
Right.
Joseph agrees to that, but he makes him swear it, right? Swear that you will do that, right? And Joseph does. And then Israel bowed himself upon the head of his bed, right? You can get this feeling of peace, okay? Why is that story? Why is that important?
Yeah, because Joseph kind of did the same thing when he died. Take my bones out of Egypt and not bury me there.
Yeah, that's going to come in chapter 50. Same kind of point. So what? Yeah, Jesse.
It kind of displays his faith too.
Yes.
All those years of their slavery, they probably knew that he says, "Take me back." We're going back because Jacob says we're going to take his bones back. So it was a reassurance of faith.
Yeah, so he's ultimately showing faith in the land promise, which he's kind of struggled with his whole life, like we were talking about, right? He spent a whole lot of his life outside the land of promise, but now he's showing ultimately his faith that in God's land promise. Okay? All right, good. All right, so in the middle there's a section on Joseph, how Joseph enriches Pharaoh. All right, so the famine is severe, and we'll go through the story quickly. But the famine is severe. By the time Jacob's family come, it's only year 2 of the 7 years of famine. So it describes how the famine is severe. So first of all, the people of Egypt spend all their money to buy food from Joseph. Okay? And that gets them through a year. But then they come back the next year and they're out of money and there's still a famine, they still have no food. So they sell all their livestock for food. Next deal is, okay, we don't have any more money, and so Joseph says, okay, well, sell me your livestock. So they sell their livestock for food. That lasts a year, and there's still a famine, and they need food again. So now they come back and say, we got nothing left. We don't have any money, and we got nothing left to sell. So what's the deal? The land. Okay? So actually two things. Number one, they sell themselves as servants and all their land to Pharaoh for food. So essentially, they're coming up, they're making a deal and saying, okay, Pharaoh, you own the land, and we're going to be the servants who work it for you. That's ultimately the deal, but for keeping yourself alive, that's a pretty good deal, right? Your alternative is to die of starvation. So that's a good deal. Okay, so ultimately, Pharaoh now owns all the land of Egypt. Yeah.
And all the people, and the drought still isn't over.
Yes, and all the people, okay? So, the people, first of all, so this is going to be an ongoing thing, all right? The people have to pay 20% to Pharaoh first because it's Pharaoh's land and they're working it. So they get 20%, so 1/5 goes to Pharaoh and then they can keep the rest for themselves to feed themselves and their family. And this becomes a permanent law in Egypt, all right? So one thing I learned in tax is the government will tell you initially how, well, this is going to be a 5-year deal, we're going to change it. No, they won't. If they put the tax in place, it's going to be there forever. Okay? I didn't say I did it, I said it's what I learned. All right, so it's interesting. This is a very unusual setup culturally, okay, for the king to own the land and not the people to own the land. So Joseph kind of comes up with this idea, but it's interesting, there's been a lot, you can look this up in history, that this was the way things worked, and it was very unusual. But, people have gone back, through archaeology and everything, and historians and writings, that this is literally the way it worked, that the land belonged to the pharaohs even after this time, okay? So, ultimately, again, Egypt is the most powerful kingdom in the world. All right? And we see this idea that Pharaoh is the king, but Joseph is the ruler. And that was the best way I could use to describe it. That's my interpretation. But it's like Pharaoh, of course, he's like, I'm in charge, but he just defers everything to Joseph. Right? Joseph is the one who's running everything. All right. Well, go ahead.
Certainly Joseph sees all this happening, and he can't feel good about this either. Because he realizes that his family came in with all this wealth, all these possessions and everything, and now they have nothing.
Well, yes, but remember, he's also set them up in their own place, in one of the best parts of the land. So, yeah, it's interesting. I would assume that his family was exempt. It doesn't exactly say that. But maybe you can infer that from the fact that they were apart in their own land. That's interesting. But it was well watered and all that, so I guess I would have always assumed that they were exempt at that point. Now, it's interesting here because at this point in Genesis, Egypt is a land of salvation, right? We think of it as a place to escape from because it changes at the beginning of Exodus, and so we think of, okay, they've got to escape. But in Genesis, Egypt is a land of salvation. All right, so I'll let you think about that. All right. Key points for our today. In chapter 47, verse 25, the people say, you have saved our lives and we will be servants. So this is when they're making the last deal with Joseph, right? So think about that statement. You have saved our lives. They're out of things to pay him with, so they say, we will be your servants. Remember, Joseph is a type of Christ. All right? Think about that statement in terms of what's going on here with Joseph. Right? Joseph saved them. They'd be dead without him. Obviously through God, right? God was the one he gives all credit to God. But ultimately, Joseph is the one who saves them. And so ultimately, because of that, they all become his servants. But think about Romans 6. I want to read this. I know we've only got a minute left. But someone turn to Romans 6. Remember at the beginning of Romans 6, it's all the talk about baptism and dying with Christ, right? And being dead to our sins. Someone read verses 17 through 18 of Romans 6.
But thanks be to God that whereas you were servants of sin, you became obedient from the heart to that form of teaching whereunto ye were delivered. And being made free from sin, ye became servants of righteousness.
All right, you see that? Being free from sin, thanks be to God that being free from sin, but you became servants of righteousness. In other words, you became servants of
God, servants of the Lord. All right, so think about that. Look at verse 22. And a lot of things in the New Testament, right? We don't have anything to pay. Jesus saved us spiritually, saved our lives. And there's nothing we could do to repay that. We ran out of things we could possibly repay him with. So what's our choice? We become his servants. Right? Think about the symbolism there. Okay? Quickly, Joseph reunites, not only does he save the world, we've already seen that, but he also reunites his fractured and sinful family. Again, like Jesus, who brings together a family for himself. He saves the world and brings together a family for himself, and that family is made up of sinful and fractured people. Right? Okay. And like Jacob, a person may come to God at any point in their life and be accepted. The New Testament is very clear about that. If someone makes a genuine decision, they are coming to God and changing their life and serving him, they can come to their point, God, at any point in their life and be accepted. But the bad choices that we make in our life have lifelong consequences that we have to deal with.
Right.
Okay? And so as Christians, as those who have come to God, we have to deal with that, just like Jacob, just like Judah. But with God on our side, God will help us deal with those.
Yeah.
All right, good. Very, very powerful chapters. Chapter 48 and 49 on Wednesday.